Napoleon said that armies move on their stomachs. And the man in charge of moving our army on its stomach or elsewise is Lieutenant General Mike McDuffie, and he's here to tell you about how we are moving our Army troops into Kosovo. Welcome back, General McDuffie.
Thanks, Kim. Good afternoon, everybody. In the past, I came and talked about humanitarian assistance, and I'll cover that at the very, very end with you a little bit. But today, we'd like to just talk about how our forces, in fact, are not only flowing into our operations in Kosovo, but also give you a little background information on how we intend to sustain our force. Not real fancy stuff, but this is kind of the meat and potatoes issues of an operation. And I'll talk a little bit about the Falcon movement, sustainment, medical support, engineering support, which is very important to what we're doing there, and then some final thoughts. Many of you have already been to the region, so you know what it looks like. But as you know, when we had the technical agreement signed, our initial entry forces came actually the U.S. Marines or the U.S. Kearsarge up through Greece, Port of Thessaloniki, up into Skopje, and of course continued on into Galani. And then we had an initial piece of what was part of Task Force Hawk, as you well know, was actually airlifted from Albania into Skopje, and again ground movement up into Galani of the U.S. sector. So this was very successful and went very rapidly, as you know. That was our first piece. Then as we got into the force packages 1 and 2, we started a sizable deployment from Germany, the central region, into our AOR through, again, Thessaloniki for the sea lift and into Skopje for the airlift. It was a multi-nodal deployment, if you would, and that is using sea lift, rail, and airlift at the different rails. And you can see we had trains that took our heavy equipment up into Bremerhaven, our port there, where they stage, and I'll talk a little bit more about the two vessels that in fact are en route down to Thessaloniki now, and then the airlift from Ramstein down into Skopje. Next slide, please. So sea, air, and rail. I'd like to talk a little bit about the two vessels that's bringing in our heavy equipment. This is really a good news story. At the end of Desert Storm, as you know, we did an analysis of our sea lift capability, and this is called the Large Medium Speed Ro-Ro, or the LMSR, as we always stated in the acronym world. It's a very, very large ship, about the size of an aircraft carrier, if you haven't seen one. It'll also go about 24 knots and will carry a lot of equipment. The USNS Bob Hope, in fact, has arrived at Thessaloniki today and commences its download. It has a heavy armored task force on it, tanks, Bradleys, artillery pieces, and other heavy equipment. And the Soderman, which is another large medium-speed Ro-Ro, in fact, as you can see, departed on the 25th and will arrive on the 3rd of July. So these are the two major muscle movements of the force closure now for our piece of K4. Very, very, very important, very, very capable. This is a major piece of our power projection capability. You know, the United States military's ability to power project is a triad, and that's sea lift, airlift, and the prepositioning piece. These vessels give us tremendous capability not only in the sea lift piece, but we also have heavy forces pre-positioned aboard these, and we will continue to do that. So to me, this is really a breakout story of a very, very, very good effort at the end of Desert Shield and Storm. Now, let's talk about sustainment. You know, how are we going to continue to take care of our troops in the field? We'll do that with a sea lock here coming in through the port of Thessaloniki. We have an interesting operation there because most of the nations that are supporting K4, working within K4, are using this port. So we've got a multinational cell there that deconflicts the arrival of ships. And then, of course, any emergency type of lift or emergency supplies needed, we will fly into Skopje using Ramstein as our hub in the central region. And then, of course, they'll be ground convoyed up into Galani. Next. Talk a little bit about medical support to Task Force Falcon. You hear the comment, level 3 care. I always like to say that's where you can really, you know, get your life saved if you're really in trouble. And we've got that well forward, right up in Galani, and that's the capability. So, I mean, if we had a trooper who was seriously ill or injured, we can take care of them right there. We then have that backup capability in Skopje, and of course we have a very, very robust air evac capability helicopter in the region back to Skopje where you can transload into fixed-wing aircraft, and then we can evacuate wherever is needed based on the injury. So we've got the medical piece taken. Engineering support, as you know, we really didn't know exactly what we're going to find in our AOR, so we have a fairly robust engineering capability that will close with this force. As you can see, it is joint. Besides an Army engineer group, you also have a CB battalion from the Navy. They have the following capabilities. They can do road, bridge repair, base camp construction. In fact, we will be building 2 base camps within the U.S. sector, though those will be primarily contracted out and built by a U.S. contractor with the C-hut design and very similar to things that we had learned in Bosnia, using the lessons learned from Bosnia. And of course, the Navy CBs, again, road, bridge, and base camp construction, talking firefighting, got the capability to do minefield marking, clearing, and those types of things. And again, those engineers are designed as part of that force package to be able to enable the military mission in our region. Next slide. Now, there's been talk about, you know, we just took off out of Albania. In fact, we still have efforts ongoing in Albania with engineers. The Navy Seabees were working on the road. If you remember that real tough road, I showed you some pictures of that probably a month ago, where we had the 41 switchbacks. They continue to work that road and have made some success on it. And we still have a Red Force team, that's the Air Force engineer piece, that continue to do work and operations in in Tirana. And then real quick on Camp Hope and the humanitarian, we actually turned over Camp Hope to the UN Relief Agency CARE over the weekend. So that, in fact, has been turned over now. As you all know, though, the refugee situation, you can take that down, continues to, in our view, improve from the standpoint of the numbers of refugees that are in Albania and in Montenegro and in Macedonia. In fact, over half of the population that we once had has now returned to Kosovo. So that all said, what's some final thoughts? If we were going to conduct a war game and use the terrain in Macedonia, the terrain in Albania, the lines of communication in Kosovo, as a logistician, I would say this is tough business. You remember we were talking about our initial footprint into Albania, we basically had one airfield, and we had to do a significant amount of improvement on our airfield. You look at the lines of communication on the ground, that one road in Albania up through Kukas, the one road from Skopje into Kosovo, the draft of the port in Durrës, all significant logistics challenge, especially with the infrastructure. But I will tell you, because of our really incredible capabilities and a lot of tenacity and hard work, that the strategic lifters and the engineers and the logisticians made this operation work very, very well. Did we ever have a wart? Sure we did. Did we ever have to work on some specifics? Sure we did. But overall, it went very well, and we're in a very good position today to continue that support. We feel pretty good about it. On the humanitarian side, as you know, we worked very hard on that. Did a lot of early work, provided a lot of HDRs. As a matter of fact, I saw live on TV today, so those yellow HDRs are still being passed out in places, and that's a good sign. And we were very prepared right at the end, had we have found significant concentrations of IDPs, which we really did not know if we would. I mean, we were prepared for that. We were prepared then to fly in, drop in, helicopter in, do whatever we needed to do to take care of those folks if we found them in dire straits. So overall, logistically, we're set, in my view, very well to continue the force flow for K4 and then sustain K4, and we'll continue to monitor the refugee situation. We still have I think it's less than 1,000 refugees now at Fort Dix. That's on track to close out by the end of the month. And again, we're set from a standpoint if we were to find a significant problem somewhere with stocks pre-positioned in Europe to react accordingly. And that's all I have. Questions?
Secretary Cohen just told us that he was looking at accelerating the forces, the K4 forces into the area. So in the next 2 weeks, the majority of the 55,000 will be in. How big a challenge is that, and how much of an acceleration is that from your original plans?
I can really only speak to the U.S. piece at this time. I just don't have the other information. We plan on having our pieces closed within the next 2 weeks. So on our timetable, we're well within that. And in fact, we're probably going to beat it by 3 or 4 days. So you know,
Represent then an acceleration, at least of U.S. forces?
yes, in fact, when I say acceleration, I mean, we are putting the forces in as fast as the infrastructure will let us do that. So, I mean, we have been very aggressive in getting our forces in. In fact, we've done a lot of pre-planning and anticipating that we'd have an agreement and, you know, some command and control work to work that.
Could you clarify, have you, or maybe Ken could, has Cohen actually ordered an acceleration of forces, or is this 3 or 4 day speed up simply due to the fact the infrastructure is going a little more smoothly?
We have not ordered an acceleration of our forces. They are proceeding on a plan that was laid out before. As General McDuffie said, as soon as the infrastructure is ready, we move in. We've been doing that from the beginning. We now have, I think, about 4,500 people in our sector. We will go up to 7,000. The Marines will come out as the 1st Infantry Division goes in. But our deployment plan, I think, as General McDuffie said, was laid out some time ago, and the fact that we were moving through a combination of rail and sea really set the deployment schedule as much as anything. The passengers, of course, are being flown down in 747s, and I think they start leaving tomorrow. Is that right?
Well, there's multiple places going in. When I talk about accelerating, what we've done is we've gone in and done a fair amount of coordination work. As an example, in Thessaloniki, where you've got different nations coming in, and we've worked very closely with the Greeks to accelerate the throughput so we don't have a bottleneck. That's what I was really talking about when we're looking at every measure to try and keep this throughput going.
So from the time the first tanks were put on the trains to be taken and put aboard the Bob Hope to today when the Bob Hope got there, how long was that?
Jeez. I have to look in the days here. I've got it somewhere written down when we actually started the week. So, I was going to say about 24 days as far as I remember it specifically, but let me verify that for you. Yes, sir.
General McDuffie, with regard to the IDPs, are they those that were in the mountains? What numbers were there? Have they come out in pretty good shape? And what more can you tell us in that regard? And what about the indigenous foodstuffs? What's been planted? What's going to be available? What's available for those refugees that are going back?
I really can't answer your question on the last piece as far as the planting, because I just don't have that information. The numbers of IDPs, again, we planned for what we thought was a potential disaster of IDPs. What we have found as we've gone in throughout Kosovo is you did not have the IDP problem that we could have had. And I've heard lots of stories, about people living in their houses and then taking off and actually staying out in the forest for a period of time when things got bad, coming back and staying in their houses, trying to take care of the livestock. So we were planning for this very large grouping of IDPs. As you know, we had all types of transportation assets set up, but we just haven't found it. I mean, there was an initial report when we first went in that, in fact, the ICRC found about 2,500, if I remember right, that had were in pretty bad shape. When I say bad shape, they needed something to eat. I mean, they weren't on the verge of dying, but it was the first thought that, oh my goodness, we may find more. But we really have not found any large numbers of IDPs. If you remember, when we were forecasting those were based on different intelligence sources. It was based on the UNHCR giving us their anticipated numbers, and we were really just planning for the worst there. So.
How many IDPs?
I don't have an exact number, but it is, it has not been a problem. We have not received the reports in from any of the sectors that we have numbers of IDPs that aren't being taken care of.
What about food to support the refugees?
No problem. From day one, there have been major food convoys that have gone in from Skopje. The World Food Program was prepared at the border, just like a military operation, as soon as the agreement was signed, as soon as they had an environment to start moving thousands of metric tons a day into the region. I have not received one single report of any problem with food.
General, you talked about phasing out the refugee program at Fort Dix. Are you taking those refugees back over? Have any been taken back over? Do you plan to take them back over?
Again, we don't make that decision in the Department of Defense. That's a state and a HHS operated initiative. To my knowledge, none of the refugees have gone back, though. They've all been placed with families in the United States. And again, I defer that, and I think that has something to do with refugee status and the legal pieces of that.
Can I ask you another question about refugees? General Jackson indicated this morning that as many as 450,000 refugees had come back across and were going back into their homes, and they expected most of them to be in by July. That's quite a number of people who are moving through that area. Is that a logistics problem for U.S. forces or for any other forces?
I will just be very candid with you, and that is this is a good news story. I mean, they're moving back, and there are not any significant. There's always logistics problems taking care of 450,000 people, but we have not found it to be something that is really influenced or gotten in the way of our operations. So, the UNHCR World Food Program, many people really anticipated that this refugee flow would crank up very, very rapidly to go back, because that was the information that they got day to day. You know, I mean, the refugees that stayed up at Kukas stayed there for a reason. I mean, we tried to get them, if you remember, to go down more into the interior of the country. They wanted to stay there because as soon as that war ended, they wanted to go back to their homes. So we consider it a good news story. In my view, the World Food Program and the UN relief agencies planned for this fairly well, and have been able to get the foodstuffs and other care out. So we see it going pretty good.
General, you talked about how the IDP situation wasn't as dire as some had anticipated. What about the condition of the roads and the level of destruction of houses? What have you found, and how does it compare to expectations?
You know, I really don't know. Because I don't have a reference point of my view, and I have not personally been there. We have, you know, you've seen as many reports, and you all have connections there with the pictures as well as we do. So it's different in different sectors. We anticipated that we would have difficulty with the lines of communication, with roads, with bridging in the sectors to go in and establish that safe, secure environment, and we put the appropriate force mix in to do that. So is it a surprise? No, I think we expected to see, you know, significant damage in infrastructure. However, within Kosovo, in the U.S. sector specifically, it has not been as bad as some anticipated. Now, that is in the U.S. sector I'm talking about, and that's from our reports from our U.S. forces. I can't speak really to the other nation sectors because I don't have that. NATO would, and we could get that.
General, I want to get clear on these IDPs. We were told, we expected to see 500,000 folks hiding in the hills. Was it that those intelligence reports and humanitarian reports were wrong, or did all of those people, as soon as the war ended, come back into their houses, so there was no way of telling how many were there?
It's hypothetical, and I really can't answer it. I mean, we had some intelligence that showed concentrations of people in the woods, and we had that. But by no means did we get into a head counting type of an operation, much like we did in the Africa crises in 1996, when we actually used P-3 Orions and others to actually you could do that. I mean, you could really do the finite work. We really didn't, you know, we had Predator and some of the UAVs in looking at that and some overhead intelligence. And so we had some concentrations, campfires and other things. But we pretty much relied on the information we received from the UNHCR based on their experience, and they really are very experienced in this, on what they thought the IDP situation would be. And so we planned accordingly. And remember, when I first briefed here, I think I had a slide that said IDPs, and it was a range of 200,000 to 1 million, if I remember right, thereabouts. And of course, then as the flow continued on into Macedonia, we whittled down that top number. So I mean, the point of those numbers, and it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, it always is, and it's a good lesson learned that we ought to ask that question. But the reality of it is that we had a number, and we planned and worked towards being able to respond to those types of emergencies had they have been found, which they were not.
You don't know of any explanation for that discrepancy?
I really don't, other than I think the people were trying to give us the best information they could based on past experience.
Thank you.
How many U.S. forces remain in Albania? Is it just what you showed there, just engineers, and how many?
I don't have the exact number. It's down in the hundreds. It's quite low now. Now, we still have Task Force Hawk, which is in the process of redeploying. The last footprint that I talk about, you got the number, Steve, exactly what that is? The engineers will be, it's a very, very small footprint. Yeah, but Task Force Hawk now is, it's 2,950 total that's continuing to flow out, but that's mostly Task Force Hawk to redeploy back to the central region. He's asking for the footprint of just the Red Horse and the CBs.
So who's there? What's there? How long are they going to be there?
We plan on closing out right now the rest of the forces that are in Albania. We will have a very small footprint there by the end of the month. Very small footprint.
2,950
By the
right
end of
now?
July, excuse me, not June. Yeah, look at the chart. There we go. 2,950 left right now. And we hope to have all of Task Force Hawk out of Albania by the 15th of August. And we'll have just a very small footprint at that point in time.
How many Task Force Hawk are there now?
2,950.
Oh, what, that's plus the
That's what you're
engineers?
talking about. Oh, in the engineers, we've got a total of 2,750 Hawk and then 200 engineers. Okay, there you go.
When you said redeploy to the central region, you mean from whence they came?
Correct. And that's the forces that are there primarily came from our forward position forces.
Went in with Task Force Falcon, though, right?
Yeah, when I say I'm really talking about Germany.
Okay.
General, when you referred to finding less damage in the U.S. sector than you expected, I mean, in my mind, there's two types of damage. One would be damage caused by Serbs, burning people's homes and so forth, and the other would be damage caused by the bombing campaign, blowing up bridges. Which of those or both were less than you expected?
What I was talking about is the damage to the lines of communication. In other words, in the ability to go in and be able to move freely enough to be able to establish the safe and secure environment. I'm not talking about damage to homes. I'm not talking about specific. I'm talking about in our initial entry, where our mission is to establish a safe and secure environment. The damage to the roads and our ability to move, we were able to do that. So we didn't
Were there
consider
bridges that you thought would be blown that were not blown?
I don't know about the specifics. I can just tell you that we have not been impaired from a standpoint to go out and execute the mission. So, and we can get more. We'll get more of that as we go on, as far as detail.
Do you have a sense of why that is? I mean, why? I know it's a little early, but why the damage is less than you expected it was going to be?
Well, again, I'm not so sure. When I say it's less than we expected it to be, it was less than we expected in order to move around and execute the mission. It really does not a comparison of how I might, as a civilian or someone out, would look at the damage from the standpoint of homes and bridges. It is the ability for us to get our mission done. Is what I'm talking about. There'll be a full assessment of that, and I really can't answer the question on, how many houses have been burned and how many bridges are out and this, that, and the other. What my point is that we were able to move fairly freely in our sector to start our mission to secure the area.
So in those instances where NATO had blown up something, it was easy to get around it.
If that was the case, or maybe it wasn't blown up. That's the point.
General, you mentioned a couple of times things about lessons learned. Is there any thought here that given the fact that it took you 3 weeks, give or take, to load this equipment and move it around Europe and into the Med, that there needs to be some kind of depot for pre-positioned equipment in the Med or in the Adriatic region for future use by NATO?
Well, in fact, there is pre-positioned equipment in Italy as we speak. In this case, though, when we deploy, what we really like to do, though, is we like to deploy units when you're close like that with their equipment. So, and in actuality, by the time that you would move forces down in and draw the equipment and move it out of Italy, we wouldn't have saved all that much time. Plus the set in Italy is not modernized to the level that, from a communication standpoint, that our set is that the troops took with them. So, and part of our strategy is pre-positioning, and in fact, that is an issue right now that's being discussed within NATO, is the viability of that set in Italy, and it's being looked at.
With regard to the Kosovo Albanians that have been coming into the United States, tell us how many are going out? How many want to go home, and are we giving them a free ticket home? How many still have a right to have 20,000 in this country, or what?
In fact, we still have refugees coming in, not into Fort Dix. The refugees that are flying in fact, are being placed directly with families as they arrive into JFK. But again, as I said earlier, I don't know of any refugees that have returned that came in as part of the U.S. commitment. Now, the U.S. commitment was 20,000. As you know, we talked about that, of many, many nations making commitments. So I don't know of any backpedaling on that commitment. However, does that mean we have to take 20,000? I don't know what that means, other than the fact that we made the commitment, fulfilling the commitment. The vetting has been going on in Macedonia, and I don't know of any government policy change to move away from that. But the answer is we haven't had any refugees go back.
These people have basically a free ticket to residency in the U.S.
Well, I don't know. I wouldn't be quite that free or with that much license. And in fact, I'd defer your question really to state on that. But it's a refugee issue. But there is a significant amount of vetting that goes on in Macedonia where the flights originate. And it's primarily family-to-family stuff.
How many have come in?
Should have brought the book. 8,700.
How many have come in since the end of hostilities? You said they're still coming?
Not that it's a very, very small flow in comparison. Initially we had a small flow, and then we had a very large flow. And in fact, Fort Dix filled right up in a very short period of time. And then the State Department, in fact, started a very, very robust vetting process in Macedonia, and so that then directed to direct flights right into JFK and where they were met by families. That was the intent all along. But the flow has really, really shrunk.
Do you know how many mines or minefields have been found in the U.S. sector? Or by that number, how many mine-finding teams we have over there?
No, I don't know. I do know that the U.S. forces will have and will have the capabilities to deal with that, but I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I don't have any statements or charts to compete with General McDuffie, so I'll take your questions. If you have any more questions, if not, we can. Yes.
On the anthrax vaccine,
Yes.
in the past, DoD officials, including yourself, have talked about how safe the vaccine is, yet there's a document that's come to light signed by Army Secretary Caldera that talks about unusually hazardous risks associated with the potential for adverse reactions in some recipients of the vaccine. How do you square the two?
First of all, the newspaper article to which you're referring makes an egregious error. It substitutes the subject of a sentence, and as every newspaper person knows, if you substitute the subject of a sentence, you can change the meaning of the sentence entirely. The newspaper article refers to a legal document that was signed by Secretary Caldera to allow the manufacturer of the vaccine, a company called Bioport, the successor to the Michigan Biologic Products Institute, to allow it to receive indemnification under a federal law. Certain standards have to be met in order to receive indemnification, and this memo was designed to meet those standards. I suppose we all buy insurance for things we don't anticipate will ever happen, such as fire insurance for houses or libel insurance for newspapers. And this was the company seeking a type of insurance, indemnification from suits should they arise. The fact of the matter is that everything we know about this vaccine shows us that it's incredibly safe. There was extensive testing before the vaccine was, before the vaccination process began. Secretary Cohen ordered that a number of tests be met. Those tests were met. Since we began vaccinating members of the armed services against exposure to anthrax, almost 900,000 shots have been given, and the adverse reaction rate is a minuscule 0.009%. There have been 79 adverse reactions out of nearly 900,000 shots given so far. This is a lower adverse reaction rate than in the DPT vaccine that all our children have received and that we have all received in the course of our lives many times over. So this has turned out to be an extremely safe vaccine. Now remember, the reason Secretary Cohen decided to require vaccination against exposure to anthrax was that we believe this is a clear and present danger facing our troops today. We know that Iraq and other countries have developed and weaponized anthrax, and therefore it is an exposure against which we are protecting the troops. Exposure to anthrax is about 98% lethal. That is, if you are not protected and you are exposed to anthrax, you have more than a 98% chance of having an adverse reaction, which is usually death. So this seemed to be a very sensible act to take, requiring vaccinations. Secretary Cohen did that. He has had 3 shots or 4 shots now. I've had 3 shots. My hair is growing. I'm more robust than ever. I sleep better. I eat better, run farther, and it's been nothing but a great experience. So, but I do urge you to compare the memorandum that Secretary of the Army Caldera signed with the article, because there is one fundamental substitution of a subject in a sentence. And I think when you read the 3rd paragraph of the memorandum, which we'll make available for you in DDI, and compare it to the article, you'll find is the old bait and switch trick that none of you would perform, but has been performed in this case. And I think much to the disservice of a program that has been designed to protect America's soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Yes.
What did you think about the Öcalan verdict in Turkey, and have any of the bases been put on heightened alert in the aftermath of that?
I'm not aware that our bases are on heightened alert. They always, of course, we practice security at the source, and local commanders have the requirement to review the security situation at all times and take appropriate reaction to it. I'm not aware that there's been any change. The Öcalan verdict is something that was produced by Turkish courts, and I understand that there is a built-in review procedure, and I don't think it would be appropriate for me to comment further on it, because my understanding is that under Turkish law there will be a review. Yes. Yes.
Ken, this is about Latin America, and basically about the fact that the United States has to transfer its military bases in Panama as well as the canal to the Panamanian government by the end of the year. How's this process going, and where the U.S. soldiers are going to go now? They're going to be reassigned to another country? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, first of all, I believe, are right on schedule, if not ahead of schedule, for removing our military people and facilities from Panama. And you are absolutely right. We made a treaty agreement in the 1970s to turn over the canal and all our military facilities in the canal zone to the government of Panama, and we are right on schedule for doing that. We have closed down most of the military facilities. As you know, the headquarters of the United States Southern Command have moved to Miami, and they are well established in Miami. We are in the process now of replacing the airport facilities we've used in Panama with forward operating locations in the Caribbean and other places, so that we can carry out our surveillance and other activities that are a part of the counter drug program and our general security program, and we're well on our way to doing that.
This situation affects geopolitically in some way the U.S. presence in Latin America?
We'll retain a strong presence in Latin America. It will be more diffuse than it was when we were operating out of Panama. I want to be very clear that the forward operating locations are not bases. They are places from which our forces will be able to operate. We have a naval presence that we maintain in the area, and of course we have very strong, and I would say much stronger, military-to-military relations with almost all countries in Latin America today than we did 10 years ago. So we have constant exchanges going on with the armed forces of Latin American countries. As you know, Secretary Cohen has been to a defense ministerial meeting in Cartagena, Colombia, last year. Late last year, he maintained strong contacts with many of his colleagues in the area. Defense Minister Jorge Dominguez from Argentina was here several weeks ago. They held a joint press conference. He has traveled in the area, and I'm sure will travel again in the next year or so. So we do have strong relations with a number of Latin American countries. He had a trip scheduled to Mexico, which he had to cancel because of Kosovo, or postpone, I should say, and I'm sure we'll get to Mexico at another time. Yes.
The Department of State disclosed yesterday that via secret dialogue between Greece and Turkey with U.S. participation, Athens and Ankara agreed to withdraw all the U.S. weapons transferred illegally in Cyprus in violation of the U.S. law. And according to the Department of State, the weapons are already out of Cyprus. As the Department of Defense, did you have any involvement in this process?
I have nothing to add with it to what the Department of State said to that.
But did you have any involvement as the Department of Defense?
I just don't know the answer to that question, which is why I'm not going to add to what the Department of State said. Yes, Carl.
Have there been any incidents between U.S. forces and anyone else in Kosovo since the last time we met? Any shooting incidents?
Well, yes, since the last time we met, there have been, and I think that came out over the weekend. There was an incident on Friday and an incident, I believe, on Sunday. I checked about half an hour before coming in here if anything had happened today and was told, no, we had no reports of incidents today. Yes, Jim.
Yeah, Ken, the Romanian defense minister a while ago said that in his meeting with Cohen, he had discussed a project to make the eastern borders of Romania militarily impassable. Can you explain what that project's all about?
I wasn't in the meeting. He explained it during the press conference, and I would refer you to the Romanian ambassador who was in the meeting, and I'm sure would be glad to talk about it further.
Well, is the United States going to help Romania strengthen its defenses on that
Jim,
eastern
I've given
border?
you the only answer I can give you. I was not in the meeting. I refer you to the Romanian embassy to elaborate on the statement made by the Romanian defense minister. Bill.
I was going to follow up the question on Panama and ask if the United States military sees the Panamanian military and their police as having, let's say, being competent to take over the security of the Panama Canal. Do we have confidence in Panama?
They have every interest in running the canal competently, efficiently, and skillfully, and I'm sure they will. The canal has been largely run by Panamanians for some time. I've visited the canal. I've seen the Panamanian staff running the canal, and I'm sure that they will be able to run this. For one thing, it is an economically important artery for Panama. Large number of ships pass through there. It's particularly important for countries like Chile and others in shipping products from the west to the east. Countries on the west coast of Latin America rely very heavily on the canal. So I assume that Panama will run this as the economic lifeline that it is.
Is there anything by way of treaty that still aligns us or makes an alliance for the United States and Panama to cooperate on the strategic protection of the treaty and Panama, for that matter? Is that all gone by the board now?
I'm not aware that there is, but I'll double check on that question with Brian Sheridan and get an answer for you. But I'm not aware that there is. Jim.
There was a report today that all the mines in Guantanamo have now been removed. Is that accurate?
Yes.
As of when?
On our side. Now remember, there's a line, there's a border area, and there were mines on both sides. And I think it's very important for everybody to realize that we have removed the mines on our side of the line I do not know what the Cubans have done on their side of the line, and it would be a great disservice for me to suggest that all the mines on both sides of the line have been removed, because I don't know that. But on our side, they've been removed, and they've been gone for probably 4 to 6 months. Yes?
During General Zinni's visit to Pakistan last week, did he discuss any arms deals with the officials he met?
You know, he was going to Pakistan to talk about ways to reduce tensions between Pakistan and India, and I'm not aware that he did talk about arms deals with Pakistan. Yes.
Will Secretary Cohen be meeting with President Kim Dae-jung on his trip here this week?
I'll check on that. I haven't looked into the schedule. He had a very good meeting with him the last time Secretary Cohen, was in Seoul, and I would not be surprised if they meet this time, but I'll find out for sure. Chris?
Do you have the price tags yet for Noble Anvil and for our part of Joint Guardian? And do you think the supplemental will be enough to pay for everything through the end of the fiscal year?
The last time I talked to our esteemed comptroller, he told me that he told me two things. One, he does not yet have final price tags. This was the end of last week. But having said that, he believes that it's quite likely that the supplemental we have received so far will pay for two things. One, our participation in Operation Allied Force, and the Joint Guardian participation through the end of this fiscal year. But that was his guesstimate based on what he knew so far. He did not yet have final figures, and he was working to get them. And I haven't seen Comptroller Bill Lynn yet this week. I don't think he's here, as a matter of fact. So I assume that when he returns, he'll complete those calculations, and we'll share them with Congress and with you at the appropriate time.
Yes. As you know, the new estimates from OMB suggest that the federal budget surplus is going to be substantially larger than had been predicted. Is the thinking here now that given that and given the failure of the Secretary's initiative on BRAC, that there'll be an attempt within the department to substantially increase the long-term funding over the FIDUP and beyond?
What makes you think his initiative has failed?
For this year, at least.
Well, for this year, clearly, it's been delayed. But we will be back. There's always room for efficient government, and that's what BRAC is. BRAC is a way to cut unnecessary spending and to rechannel money we don't need to spend on unused facilities into modernization, training, and readiness. So we will, I'm sure, be back next year making the same reasonable case that we made this year, looking for more men and women of reason to respond to our case. Having said that, as you know, President Clinton asked for a $112 billion increase in the defense budget over 6 years in the budget he submitted earlier this year. And that is working its way through Congress. There's some indication that we'll get more money than that, more money than we requested. Obviously, we will look at our budget needs as we prepare for next year's budget, but I think it's premature to talk about any further increases than what the President has requested so far. Steve.
One question about the anthrax. What countries besides Iraq are known to have weaponized anthrax?
Well, certainly Russia at one time had an active anthrax program. Iraq has weaponized it. We believe that North Korea has an anthrax capability, and there may be other countries as well that have anthrax capabilities. But it only takes one country to launch anthrax against our troops to inflict heavy damage if the troops have not been vaccinated. And that's why we have adopted this program and to require all members of the military to be vaccinated against anthrax exposure. Chris.
On that same issue, did you say the company was called Bioport, the successor company that was seeking indemnification, whatever it's called? Anyway, Is it normal for a company doing contracting to the federal government to get essentially sort of, I guess, subsidized indemnification, or would they get just private insurance like any other company?
Well, the Secretary of the Army has issued a statement, which I commend to your attention, on this very issue. And he says that there is a provision in the law to indemnify companies against certain types of product liability risk, and that in this case it seemed a reasonable measure to take. I'm not an expert on product liability, or any liability probably, but so I can't tell you how often this provision of the law is invoked by the government.
Can
Yes,
you explain
Pam.
why it was a reasonable measure to take in this case?
Well, I think the memorandum does explain why it was a reasonable measure to take, and I commend that to your attention.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
How much is your hair growing?